Jasmine Carter sat in the corner booth of Moonlight Cafe, staring at her laptop screen with tears threatening to spill. 23 rejection emails in 1 week. Her fingers trembled as she opened yet another message that began with the dreaded words, "Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with other candidates." At 25 years old, Jasmine had imagined her life would look different by now. She had moved to the city 3 years ago with notebooks full of stories and a heart full of ambition. She wanted to become a published author, to create tales that would touch souls and inspire change. But reality had other plans. Her freelance writing gigs barely covered groceries, and her landlord had stopped accepting promises instead of rent. Her best friend, Nicole, slid into the booth carrying 2 chocolate muffins. "Still hunting?" she asked gently, pushing 1 muffin toward Jasmine. "Hunting implies I might actually catch something," Jasmine replied, managing a weak smile. "I am more like a fish flopping on dry land, hoping rain will come." Nicole pulled out her phone and scrolled through a job posting site. "Wait, look at this! Sterling Enterprises needs an executive assistant. The pay is incredible." Jasmine's eyes widened when she saw the salary. It was 3 times what she currently made in a good month. But then she saw the name attached to the position and her stomach dropped. "That is Victor Sterling. Nicole, people do not work for him. They survive him barely. Come on, how bad can one person be?" Last month, his assistant quit after 2 weeks and checked into a wellness retreat for stress recovery. The one before that lasted 9 days and now requires therapy. Victor Sterling is not a boss. He is a natural disaster in an expensive suit. The glass tower, despite her fears, desperation won. That night, Jasmine crafted an application letter that poured out her heart. She wrote about resilience, about learning to stand back up after every fall, about the strength that comes from struggle. At midnight, before courage could abandon her, she clicked send. The call came 48 hours later. A crisp, professional voice informed her that Mr. Sterling would see her tomorrow at 2 o'clock. No pleasantries, no warm welcome, just an appointment that felt more like a summons to judgment. Jasmine borrowed a navy blazer from Nicole and practiced walking in heels she had not worn since her college graduation. She researched Sterling Enterprises until her eyes burned. Victor Sterling had built his empire from nothing, transforming a small consulting firm into a billion-dollar corporation. He was 36, unmarried, and had a reputation for excellence that bordered on obsession. The Sterling Enterprises building pierced the sky like a shard of glass and ambition. Jasmine's reflection in the lobby's polished marble looked small and uncertain. Employees rushed past with expressions that seemed permanently stressed, their conversations conducted in hushed, urgent tones. A woman at reception directed her to the elevator with a smile that did not reach her eyes. 45th floor. "Good luck," she added, and something in those 2 words sounded like a farewell. The collision. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway that screamed power and perfection. Everything was sharp angles and cold elegance. Jasmine stepped out, her borrowed heels clicking against the polished floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape. She was reviewing her rehearsed introduction in her head when she turned a corner and walked straight into a wall. Except it was not a wall. It was a man. A very tall, very solid man wearing what was clearly a custom-tailored charcoal suit. Her coffee, which she had been clutching like a security blanket, launched itself forward with devastating accuracy. The lid popped off, and hot liquid splashed across his chest, creating a dark stain that spread like guilt across expensive fabric. Time stopped. Jasmine watched in horror as coffee dripped from his tie, each drop seeming to fall in slow motion. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she gasped, her hands fumbling uselessly in her purse for napkins that would be utterly inadequate for this catastrophe. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was not watching where I was going. I will pay for the cleaning. Actually, I cannot afford to pay for that suit, but I will find a way. I am so sorry." When she finally looked up, she found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp jawlines and perfect symmetry. But those eyes held no warmth, only a cold fury that made her knees weak. "You must be Jasmine Carter," he said, his voice like winter wind. Each word was precisely articulated, carrying an Arctic chill that made the air between them feel frozen. Her brain finally connected the dots. The expensive suit, the commanding presence, the location. "You are Victor Sterling." Indeed. He looked down at his ruined shirt with an expression that could freeze oceans. "And you have just guaranteed that this will be the most memorable interview of my career." The interview from another reality Jasmine expected to be escorted out by security. Instead, Victor turned and walked toward a set of imposing double doors at the hallway's end. "Follow me," he commanded without looking back. His office was a temple to success and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made everything below seem insignificant. The furniture was arranged with psychological precision, each piece positioned to make visitors feel small. "Sit," Victor instructed, moving behind his desk with movements that were both graceful and threatening. Jasmine perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment. "Mr. Sterling, I want to apologize again. I know first impressions matter, and I have clearly failed spectacularly." "Why should I hire you?" he asked, completely ignoring her apology. His blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. The question caught her off guard. She had expected anger, dismissal, maybe even a lecture on professionalism. She had not expected him to continue as if she had not just destroyed his clothing. "Because I do not quit," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before her brain could stop them. "Everyone talks about your reputation, Mr. Sterling. They say you are impossible to work for. But maybe that is because people keep trying to be perfect. And perfect is not sustainable. I am not perfect. I spill coffee. I make mistakes. But I also learn fast, work hard, and refuse to give up." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe? Or curiosity? "My last 12 assistants all said similar things," Victor said, his voice dangerously soft. "They all believed they were different. They all quit within a month." "Then maybe you were hiring people who were too afraid of you," Jasmine replied, her natural boldness overriding her nervousness. "Maybe you need someone who sees you as a person with high standards rather than a monster to be feared." Victor stood and moved around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. But Jasmine refused to look away. "The hours are brutal. The work is demanding. I expect excellence, and I do not tolerate excuses. Can you handle that?" "Yes," she said simply, meeting his gaze steadily. "You start Monday. 8 o'clock sharp. Do not be late. And Miss Carter, try not to spill anything else." Jasmine walked out of his office in a daze, unsure whether she had just been incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. As the elevator doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Victor Sterling standing at his window, looking out at his empire. Something told her that her life was about to change in ways she could not possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with the weight of 1,000 doubts. Jasmine stood outside Sterling Enterprises at 7:45, clutching a travel mug with a lid she had tested 17 times. She had barely slept, her mind racing through scenarios of everything that could go wrong. The building looked different in the early morning light, less intimidating but somehow more real. This was not a dream or a desperate gamble anymore. This was her actual job, working for a man who had reduced grown professionals to tears. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet efficiency. Jasmine took the elevator to the 45th floor, her heart beating faster with each ascending number. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and perfectly styled gray hair. "You must be Jasmine. I am Patricia Hayes, the Human Resources Director," the woman said, extending her hand. "Welcome to what might be the most challenging job of your life." Patricia led her to a desk positioned strategically outside Victor's office. The workspace was equipped with everything she could possibly need, including 3 computer monitors, multiple phone lines, and a stack of binders that looked thick enough to stop bullets. Mr. Sterling drinks his coffee black. No sugar, no cream. He takes exactly one 15-minute break at 10:30. He does not like interruptions during his morning review, which happens from 8 to 9:15. And whatever you do, never assume you know what he wants. Always confirm. Jasmine absorbed the information like her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Patricia spent the next hour walking her through systems, protocols, and the countless ways she could accidentally trigger Victor's legendary temper. At exactly 8 o'clock, Victor emerged from the elevator like a storm given human form. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair styled with precision, and his expression set in what Jasmine was beginning to recognize as his default mode of controlled intensity. "Ms. Carter," he said without breaking stride. "My office, now." The first test Victor's office felt colder in the morning light. He moved behind his desk with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "The Henderson merger," he said, sliding a thick folder across the polished surface. "Everything is disorganized. I need it sorted, analyzed, and summarized by noon. Every contract, every clause, every potential issue. Can you handle that?" Jasmine opened the folder and immediately understood why his previous assistants had fled. The contents were chaos incarnate. Contracts were mixed with correspondence. Financial documents were out of order, and nothing seemed to follow any logical system. "Any questions?" Victor asked, his tone suggesting that questions were a sign of weakness. "Just one," Jasmine said, meeting his eyes. "Do you want me to just organize this, or do you want me to actually solve the problems I find?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "What problems?" "Well, from what I can see in the first few pages, there are 2 different contract versions with conflicting payment terms. The timeline does not match the project scope, and there is a reference to an addendum that seems to be missing entirely." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You noticed all that in 30 seconds? "I notice things. It is what I do when I am not spilling coffee." For the briefest moment, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Fix it. All of it. And Ms. Carter, impress me." Finding her rhythm, Jasmine returned to her desk with the folder and dove in. This was the kind of puzzle she loved, the kind of challenge that made her brain light up with possibilities. She organized, cross-referenced, and built spreadsheets that tracked every discrepancy. By 11 o'clock, she had not only sorted the Henderson merger, but had also identified 9 significant issues that could have cost Sterling Enterprises millions. She prepared a detailed report with solutions for each problem, color-coded for priority. When she knocked on Victor's door at noon, he was on a video call with executives in what sounded like Tokyo. He gestured for her to enter without, breaking his conversation about market projections and expansion strategies. Jasmine placed the folder on his desk and quietly retreated. Through the glass wall, she watched him end his call and open her report. His expression remained neutral as his eyes scanned the pages, but she saw the moment when surprise replaced skepticism. 5 minutes later, his voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Carter, my office." She entered to find him standing by the window, her report in his hands. "You found all of this in 4 hours?" he asked, turning to face her. "I found it in the first hour," she admitted. "I spent the other 3 double-checking and preparing solutions." Victor walked closer, and Jasmine noticed something different in his expression. It was not quite approval, but it was not disapproval either. It was something like respect, reluctant, and unexpected. "Do you know why my assistants quit, Miss Carter? Because you demand perfection and they are too afraid to fail?" "Because they try to please me instead of doing what is right," he said. "They spend so much energy managing my mood that they forget to manage the work. You did not do that. You focused on the problem, not on me." "Well, you are pretty intimidating," Jasmine said with a small smile. "But intimidating does not mean you are wrong. You have high standards because the work matters. I can respect that." Something shifted in the air between them. Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. Small victories over the following weeks, Jasmine developed a rhythm. She learned to read Victor's moods from the set of his shoulders or the tone of his brief instructions. She discovered that beneath his harsh exterior was a man who genuinely cared about excellence, not for ego, but because he believed in doing things right. She also learned that Victor stayed late every night, working long after everyone else had gone home. On her second Thursday, she stayed late too, organizing files for the next day's presentation. Around 8 o'clock, Victor emerged from his office looking exhausted. "You are still here?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "So are you," Jasmine replied, not looking up from her computer. "I figured if you are going to work yourself to exhaustion, someone should make sure you have what you need." Victor stood there for a moment, seeming unsure how to respond. "You do not have to stay late, Ms. Carter. I do not pay overtime." "I know. But I also know tomorrow's presentation is important, and I would rather be prepared than scrambling in the morning." He nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. "Have you eaten?" "Not since lunch. There is a good Italian place that delivers." "My treat, since you are here because of my workload." They ate at the conference table, surrounded by spreadsheets and market reports. Victor talked about the business, explaining strategies and decisions in a way he never did during work hours. Jasmine found herself fascinated not by the corporate details, but by the passion in his voice when he discussed building something meaningful. "Why do you push so hard?" she asked between bites of pasta. Victor was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Because mediocrity is easy, and easy does not change anything. I built this company because I wanted to prove that excellence matters, that doing things right creates value that lasts." "But at what cost?" Jasmine asked gently. "Patricia told me you have not taken a vacation in 4 years. You work 16-hour days. When do you actually live?" "This is living," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Jasmine said softly. "This is existing. Living is what happens when you stop long enough to enjoy what you have built." Victor looked at her for a long moment, and Jasmine saw something vulnerable in his expression, something young and uncertain hiding behind the armor of success. "Maybe," he said finally, "but I do not know how to do that." The crisis. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in late October. Jasmine arrived at 8 to find the office in chaos. The Westfield deal, Sterling Enterprises' largest contract of the year, was falling apart. The client's CEO had suddenly pulled out, citing concerns about project timelines and delivery capabilities. Victor was in his office, his usual composure cracked by visible frustration. He was on the phone, his voice sharp, with barely controlled anger. When he hung up, he looked at Jasmine through the glass wall with an expression that would have sent his previous assistants running. But Jasmine did not run. She grabbed her tablet and walked into his office. "Tell me what happened," she said calmly. "Westfield thinks we cannot deliver on schedule. Their new operations director convinced the CEO that our timeline is unrealistic. We are about to lose $20 million because someone decided to second-guess our capabilities. Do we have proof we can deliver on time?" "Of course we do. But they are not listening. They want guarantees we cannot give." Jasmine thought for a moment. "What if we give them something better than guarantees? What if we give them transparency?" Victor looked at her sharply. "Explain." "Set up a meeting. Not a formal presentation, but a real conversation. Bring them here. Show them our process, our team, our systems. Let them see how we actually work. People trust what they can see more than what they are promised." "That is unconventional." "So was hiring someone who spilled coffee on you," Jasmine pointed out. "But that turned out okay." For the first time since she had known him, Victor Sterling laughed. It was brief, almost surprised, but genuine. "Set it up," he said. "And Ms. Carter, you are presenting with me." The meeting happened 2 days later. Jasmine had worked herself to exhaustion preparing, coordinating with every department, creating presentations that were honest rather than polished. When the Westfield team arrived, Victor did something unprecedented. He let Jasmine lead. She spoke about processes and timelines with genuine enthusiasm, answered tough questions with honesty instead of corporate speak, and treated their concerns as valid rather than insulting. When the operations director pushed back on delivery dates, Jasmine pulled up real-time data showing similar projects they had completed ahead of schedule. "We are not asking you to trust promises," she said. "We are asking you to trust evidence, And the evidence shows we deliver. By the end of the meeting, the Westfield CEO was smiling. The deal was back on, stronger than before. As their clients left, Victor turned to Jasmine with an expression she had never seen before. Pride. Pure, unguarded pride. That was remarkable, he said quietly. We make a good team, Jasmine replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Victor nodded slowly, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with business. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. But in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of their success, they both felt it. The walls Victor Sterling had built around himself were beginning to crumble, and for the first time in years, he was not sure he wanted to rebuild them. November brought cold winds and subtle changes to the 45th floor of Sterling Enterprises. The office staff had stopped whispering about how long Jasmine would last and started whispering about something else entirely. The way Victor's expression softened when she entered his office. The way he smiled at her comments during meetings. The way they worked together like two parts of a whole. Jasmine tried to ignore the whispers and the flutter in her chest whenever Victor looked at her with those intense blue eyes. This was a professional relationship, nothing more. She was his assistant, and he was her boss. The fact that her heart raced when he stood too close was irrelevant. The way his rare smiles made her feel like she had won something precious did not matter, but denial became harder with each passing day. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. Most of the staff had left by 7, but Jasmine remained at her desk, reviewing proposals for an upcoming board meeting. Through the glass wall, she could see Victor at his desk, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over his chair. He looked tired in a way that made her heart ache. She knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 cups of tea she had brewed in the small kitchen. You need to stop working, she said, placing 1 cup on his desk. Victor looked up, surprise flickering across his features. It is only 7:30. It is 7:45 and you have been here since 6 this morning. That is almost 14 hours, Victor. He blinked at her use of his first name. She had been calling him Mr. Sterling for months, maintaining professional distance. But something about tonight felt different. More honest. When did you start calling me Victor? He asked, his voice softer than usual. Just now, Jasmine admitted, settling into the chair across from him. Is that okay? Yes, he said quietly. It is more than okay. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping tea while the city lights sparkled beyond the windows. The office felt different at night, more intimate, like they were the only 2 people in the world. Can I ask you something personal? Jasmine ventured. Victor set down his cup, his expression guarded but not closed. You can ask. I may not answer. Why do you do this to yourself? The endless hours, the impossible standards, the walls you keep between yourself and everyone else? What are you running from? The truth beneath the armor Victor was silent for so long that Jasmine thought he would not answer. Then he stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. I grew up with nothing, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. My father was a dreamer who made bad decisions and worse investments. We lost everything when I was 15. Our house, our savings, our dignity. I watched my mother work 3 jobs just to keep us fed. I watched my father give up, retreating into bottles and bitterness. Jasmine remained silent, letting him speak at his own pace. I promised myself I would never be like him. I would never fail, never be weak, never let anyone down because I was not good enough. So I worked. I studied. I built this company from nothing because I had to prove that I was different, that I was better. You succeeded, Jasmine said gently. You built something amazing. But at what cost? Victor turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. I spent so many years building walls to keep failure out that I built a prison instead. I pushed everyone away because closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness, until you walked into my life and spilled coffee on me. A soft laugh escaped Jasmine. That was not my finest moment. It was perfect, Victor said, moving closer, because you were not trying to impress me. You were just being yourself, honest and real and unafraid. Every assistant I hired before you tried to be perfect, they shaped themselves into what they thought I wanted. But you challenged me. You called me out when I was wrong. You saw me as a person, not a position. You are a person, Jasmine said, standing to face him. A brilliant, driven, sometimes infuriating person who cares more than he admits and works too hard because he thinks rest is weakness. But you are also kind, even when you pretend not to be. You are fair, even when being harsh would be easier. And you see potential in people even when they do not see it in themselves. Victor closed the distance between them until they were standing inches apart. When did you figure me out? Around the second week, Jasmine admitted with a small smile. Right after you yelled at me for reorganizing your files, then quietly implemented every single change I suggested. You were right about the filing system. I know. Crossing the line. They stood there, the air between them crackling with unspoken feelings. Jasmine knew they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything. If they crossed this line, there was no going back to the safe distance of employer and employee. Jasmine, Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. She nodded, her heart pounding. I have spent months trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is merely professional respect, that I appreciate your skills, your intelligence, your work ethic. But I am tired of lying to myself. You have become the best part of my day. When I wake up, I look forward to seeing you. When I make decisions, I want your opinion. When I succeed, you are the first person I want to tell. And when I fail, you are the only person I trust to see my weakness. Jasmine felt tears gathering in her eyes. Victor, Let me finish, he said gently. I know this is complicated. I am your boss. There are power dynamics and professional considerations. If you do not feel the same way, we can pretend this conversation never happened. But I needed you to know that you have done something I thought impossible. You made me want to tear down my walls. You made me want to be vulnerable. You made me want to live instead of just exist. Are you finished? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling. Yes. Good. Because I have been in love with you since the day you hired me despite the coffee incident. I have been in love with the way you care about doing things right, the way you push yourself and everyone around you to be better. I have been in love with the rare moments when you smile and the world seems brighter. I have been in love with you, Victor Sterling. Even though I knew it was complicated and probably foolish and definitely against every rule of workplace relationships. Victor's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. You love me? Completely, hopelessly, inconveniently. He reached up and cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite his usual intensity. There is nothing inconvenient about this. About us. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. Gentle at first, then deeper, filled with months of suppressed longing and denied feelings. Jasmine wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Victor rested his forehead against hers. What do we do now? Jasmine whispered. We figure it out together, Victor replied. I will talk to Patricia tomorrow about adjusting your position so there are no ethical concerns. I will not hide what we have, but I will not let it compromise your career either. What if people talk? Let them talk. I have spent my entire life worrying about what people think, trying to maintain an image of perfection. But you taught me that being real is more important than being perfect. If they talk, they talk. All that matters is us. A new beginning. The following morning, the office buzzed with speculation when Victor and Jasmine arrived together. but Victor addressed it head-on during the 10 o'clock staff meeting. "I want to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying the authority everyone recognized. "Jasmine Carter will be transitioning to a new role as Director of Special Projects, reporting directly to the board rather than to me. This change is effective immediately and reflects both her capabilities and our commitment to maintaining professional integrity." He paused, then added, "I also want you to know that Jasmine and I are in a personal relationship. This relationship began after careful consideration and will be conducted with complete transparency and professionalism. If anyone has concerns, my door remains open." The room was silent for a moment, then Patricia started clapping. Soon the entire room joined in. Jasmine felt her cheeks flush, but she held her head high. After the meeting, Patricia pulled her aside. "You know what you did, do you not?" she asked with a warm smile. "What do you mean?" "You did what 12 other women could not. You saw through his armor to the person underneath. You challenged him, stood up to him, and refused to let him push you away. And in doing so, you gave him permission to be human again." 6 months later, the rooftop garden of Victor's penthouse had become Jasmine's favorite place in the city. They sat together on a comfortable bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Victor's arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "I have been thinking," Victor said, his voice thoughtful. "Dangerous habit?" Jasmine teased. He smiled and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I want to expand our mentorship program. Help young people from difficult backgrounds get opportunities they would not otherwise have. Give them the chance I wish I had received." "That sounds perfect," Jasmine said, turning to look at him. "You have come a long way from the terrifying CEO who made assistants cry." "I had help," Victor replied, pulling her closer. "I had someone who refused to quit on me, even when I gave her every reason to run away. Someone who saw potential in a broken, angry man hiding behind success." "You were never broken," Jasmine said firmly. "You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. But you do not need those walls anymore. You have me." "I do have you," Victor agreed, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "And I thank whatever force in the universe made you clumsy enough to spill coffee on me that day." Jasmine laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Best accident of my life." "Mine too." As they watched the sun sink below the horizon, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had walked into Sterling Enterprises desperate and afraid, convinced she would fail. Instead, she had found not just a job, but a purpose. Not just an employer, but a partner. Not just success, but love. Victor had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but courage. That perfection was less important than authenticity. That the walls he built to protect himself had actually been keeping him prisoner. Together, they had created something neither expected, but both needed. A partnership built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to see each other truly. They had proven that love could bloom even in the most unlikely places, between a terrifying CEO and a clumsy girl who refused to quit. "I love you," Victor whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Jasmine replied, her heart full of certainty. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen vulnerability over safety, who had discovered that sometimes the best love stories begin with a disaster and a second chance. The city stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promises. But in that moment, nothing mattered except the two of them, together at last, walls down and hearts open. The clumsy girl had refused to quit, and the terrifying CEO had learned to love. And that made all the difference. The end.